My talk is actually it builds upon what was mentioned in especially in the last two presentations, and I will be talking about essentially EGNARIA, presenting you an innovative approach to Natech risk management. So I'm taking this idea of what Miss Susan Harvey essentially talked about in the last slide, last presentation, and then building upon it from a gaming perspective. This is a rough outline of the presentation. I'll give a small background. I'll talk you through why community involvement in disaster risk management is important, and what is it specific about Natech risk information disclosure. And then I'll talk a little bit more about how we approach this serious game development, and how I'll introduce you the educational game for Natech risk awareness. And I'll talk a little bit about some impressions and the evaluation of the game and what's to come. So when it comes to community participation, everyone's been telling that this is the holy grail. We need community engagement in disaster risk management in order to make it effective. However, we find that communities are often easier said than done, as communities are not actively involved in risk reduction. There is a need, therefore, to open this risk communication, risk-related decision-making to the public and involve them more. One step in the right direction is risk communication and information disclosure, where there have been studies noting that transparency and information dissemination throughout the risk reduction process enhances this engagement. And lately, we have seen, as mentioned, a shift away from top-down structure than purely scientific disaster risk management methodologies towards those that emphasize engagement, emotion, peer-to-peer relationships, for example, and horizontal communication and cooperation among stakeholders. One of such is, for example, serious gaming. So we wanted to look, this discussion is only gaining momentum, gaining importance in the field of Natech risk communication, Natech being the natural hazard triggered technological accidents, essentially accidents that have been technological accidents, chemical releases that have been caused by natural hazards such as earthquakes, typhoons, tsunami, and so on. So we wanted to investigate whether serious gaming could be applied to raise Natech risk awareness and stimulate stakeholder engagement in disaster risk management. One issue with that is that we don't have as many natural Natech accidents as reference, and therefore people find it a little bit harder than, for example, to create scenarios and think about Natech scenarios when they don't have reference points. So we wanted to develop a serious game with emphasis on information disclosure for Natech preparedness, highlight issues of awareness, and involve communities in Natech risk disaster risk management. When I'm talking about serious games, essentially, we're talking about the games that may be played seriously or casually, but essentially they are not intended to be played primarily for amusement. They can be fun, but they're meant to be educational for the participants. So these sort of games have been seeing a growing attention, a growing interest in academic society lately, as they seem to be able to appeal to wide audiences, convey consistent and reliable disaster-related information, and also they competently can increase risk awareness and understanding about hazards and vulnerabilities in lay people, and sometimes also teach useful skills related to disaster risk management. With this in mind, we wanted to develop a game that focuses on mutual learning and collaborative decision-making, and therefore we wanted to have not a computer game, but rather a face-to-face game, a role-playing game where people take up some roles in order to create an opportunity for a multi-log, as it mentioned, so people can have different opinions and assume different roles and essentially discuss in this regard. So, and have a multi-stakeholder deliberation process. We want the game obviously to be experiential, as was mentioned earlier. So we try to immerse people into those scenarios and emphasize procedural learning in order to tackle simplified yet realistic game problems and reflect on real life mechanisms. So we're talking about imaginary scenarios, but in any case, they have some relation with real life situations. And of course, the game deals with the incomplete information, an element that fosters collaboration. So not all participants have the same amount of information, and since this is a collaborative game, they have to collaborate, share information, and so on. This is the gist of the game. It's called EGNARIA, an educational game for Natech risk awareness. So we're targeting at the first step of disaster risk management, raising awareness about an issue that may threaten communities. So the game essentially is set in a coastal area, an industrial city that is affected regularly by earthquake and tsunami. And the goal is essentially to survive the disasters by becoming better informed and prepared while keeping the support of other players in the process. Players are citizens that vote for a community leader and an industry manager among them. So they have these different roles, as I mentioned. They try to manage their available resources, both individually and as a community, considering disaster preparedness actions with the aim of mitigating the impact or protecting themselves and their properties from the natural hazards and the biochemical accident scenarios. So players essentially are awarded points through preparedness actions and lose them if they become directly exposed to the hazards. They have they have cards, action cards that dictate them how they can play the role. We applied this game in a student scenario initially. There was a workshop of essentially 3 hours, 2.5, 3 hours, with an introduction about the game and what we were doing there. And then we had a hefty gaming session of about 2 hours. And then what's most importantly, I would say, is the debriefing session, the discussion afterwards, which allowed people to make these connections with real life, as mentioned, and for our purposes also evaluate the game, but I will not deal with that. I want to go through some players' impressions to give you an idea of what we were able to elicit through this workshop. So initially there were people mentioned that they had very little knowledge about chemical risks, and by playing the game, this sort of improved their spatial awareness for chemical accidents. It sort of enlightened them towards this threat that they hadn't been considered, and it's only understandable. We don't think about chemical accidents happening and threatening our lives on a daily basis. Participants had no prior knowledge of disaster risk management, and therefore playing this game from the different roles involved in the game helped them gain a better understanding of how community-based disaster risk management actually operates, about resource allocation and so on, and also about stakeholder accountability. They needed to follow through their actions and perhaps even collaborate with others and also show their intent and follow through. They also realized the importance, which was the main goal of the game, the importance of information sharing, especially chemical risk information sharing, and stakeholder collaboration, which was very encouraging. And sharing information, having access to chemical information actually changed a lot the discussions among the players during the game. They noted that initially they didn't have enough information. They didn't know about the hazards, the chemical hazards that they are exposed to. And having access to chemical risk information allowed them to have better decision-making and understand what preparedness actions they had to take, both individually and as a community. They realized that sharing such information has a lot of significant implications for their preparedness choices, and it shapes having transparency throughout the process, and knowing all these chemical risks allows for public deliberations and better public deliberations and stakeholder interactions in a fair manner. We showed that in terms of Natech risk communication, we needed this game is a step towards raising risk awareness, as I mentioned, for a sort of risk and scenarios that are not very well known and not very, although they have significant implications, they don't usually get as much attention as we experts would like people to have and communities to think about. These sort of complex disaster risk management is usually left to risk managers to deal with, but it does affect communities, and we need to get the word out. Thankfully, the game seemed to work in that direction and also motivate people to learn more and communicate about Natech and chemical accidents in general. Perhaps, as was showcased earlier, sharing information about risk could be through risk assessment maps. It helps people visualize better. Of course, such tools help with visualization. And one important aspect in terms, perhaps the social innovation of the game, is that this sort of initiatives can create a communicative space for communities, as Professor Kada would mention. Essentially, a communicative space, a space where experts and communities can come together and discuss about what sort of solutions they can come up to the problems that they face. This can be, of course, adapted to disaster risk management, but it can be adapted to humanitarian innovation, humanitarian logistics, and so on, and all these sort of threats that the community may face. In this regard, having such boundary objects that can facilitate, that can raise awareness and facilitate a discussion. It's a discussion generation tool, essentially can help with creating these spaces where communities and experts and other sort of government, let's say, or business representatives can come together and discuss more openly about the hazards they face. In a nutshell, we essentially developed, as I mentioned, a gaming approach for Natech risk communication, a sort of a first, a novel approach in this regard. Granted, the game is still, I suppose, in a trial workshop, but we did have this encouraging results serving as a proof of concept of that this could be the way forward, and we have all the research to back up these claims, to support these claims. And of course, we need to understand more the long-term impact of the game, and for that we need further applications of the game, and perhaps in different cultural contexts and so on. This is something that we're working on. And finally, as you can see, this is the crux of the game can be simplified to its main mechanics, which we can then take apart and create different versions, translate it into different contexts and various settings. So change of the chemical substances and or geographic areas, or even the natural hazards the communities face. So the core of the game can be adapted in this regard to many different contexts given time and intention. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as best as I can.